I hate your face, your voice, and your personality. Get out. Because my family live here.
While she acts like a good wife in front of my son, she shows her true colors when it's just the two of us. My daughter-in-law, like having a dual personality, have been plotting to throw me out with heartless words after all I've done for her. She'll realize who's been supporting this household. Imagining my eldest daughter-in-law crying and apologizing, I calmly looked into her eyes and replied, "I understand."
My name is Kristen.
This year I turned 72. My father was a famous novelist writing many mystery novels. Growing up watching him, I often imagined locked room mysteries and stories by mimicking my father. When he was at his peak in his 60s, he developed early onset Alzheimer's and could no longer write. My mother passed away from illness when I was in high school, and I grew up with just my father. Caring for my father with Alzheimer's alone became difficult. With a heavy heart, I decided to place him in a nursing home. That was in the last year of my 30s. When my father could no longer write, I desperately hid it and continued writing under his name. I've written dozens of works to date. I wrote books fervently and solely to protect my father's name. Publishing books under my father's name, I gained fame as a novelist. During this, I divorced my husband over irreconcilable differences. Taking my only son with me, I left the house and struggled every day just to survive and raise him. Around that time, I managed to make ends meet by writing. My father passed away in the nursing home. Being his only family, I inherited all his property, including a vast piece of land. With a decent inheritance from my father's career as a novelist, I decided to build a large tower apartment on that land. I thought managing the apartment would secure my future, even if I couldn't write anymore. Despite such worries, I've been able to continue writing for over 30 years. When I started writing, my son was still in kindergarten, and I often wrote during the day or after he went to bed. Perhaps that's why he has no idea what my job is. He probably just thinks I'm always at home, regretting making my son grow up without a father, and being overly indulgent with my late-born child. He lacks the effort to try hard. He's been raised to think everything will be given and done by his mother. I feel responsible for such upbringing. Simon, proud but immature, often quit jobs raised to 40 and being told what to do. I knew I was partly to blame for indulging him. So, when Simon, on the cusp of 36, brought home a woman he wanted to marry, it caught me off guard. She seemed a decade younger and delicate with a sweet voice. Simon, who is over 30 with no significant earnings or marriage, is living at home. Made me wonder about his future. Hearing this, I couldn't just rejoice. Simon was decent-looking, but not notably successful or wealthy. He often changed jobs, and now he had brought home a woman much younger than him. This made me fear he was being deceived. Oblivious to my worries, the two of them seemed blissfully happy. Then, the woman who was to become Simon's wife joined the home where I had been living with my son, and their married life began. The apartment we lived in was built on land passed down from my father for apartment management purposes. Having lived alone with Simon since he was young, I felt a bit bewildered living with a virtual stranger, even if she was Simon's wife. From the day Sandra was introduced, she seemed too comfortable in our home, leaving me anxious about how my life would change. Despite my concerns, the couple was unconcerned. Simon and Sandra cheerfully shared. I had no issue with the Hawaiian wedding, but I knew Simon didn't have much savings. As I suspected, he later asked me in secret from Sandra to fully fund it. Reluctantly, I agreed to prepare the money. The next day, as usual, I woke up early, but Simon and Sandra were still asleep. I didn't plan to leave all the housework to Sandra, but continuing to care for her as before felt wrong. Later, Simon rushed out for work without breakfast.
What about Sandra?
Ignoring the question, Simon hurried out the door. Soon after, Sandra emerged, still in pajamas, rubbing her sleepy eyes.
Good morning, Sandra. Simon already left.
Her demeanor was cold, unlike the smiling face she showed Simon.
You should have woken me up. Simon was in such a rush.
Isn't that Sandra's job as your soon-to-be husband?
Huh? That's irrelevant. You're free anyway. Can't keep a useless old lady like you in this house.
Sandra mocked me with a laugh. She manipulated me to her advantage.
Make my breakfast scrambled eggs.
She was treating me like a maid. Knowing it was pointless to argue, I silently began preparing breakfast. When I set the table, Sandra started eating without a word. I told her I was leaving.
Bye then.
She waved me off without looking as if rushing me out. Was she always like this? I pondered about Sandra's behavior the day before. Sandra's attitude gradually worsened, and I felt suffocated. Yet I had another place to belong, so leaving the house where I lived with my son and his wife was fine by me. It was a room I had prepared solely for writing my novels. I suppose you could call it an office, though. At an office, just a regular apartment? But it's a secret from Simon. Sandra continued her routine, like waking up only after Simon left for work, expecting me to prepare breakfast as usual. I wondered if Simon knew Sandra's true nature. I never saw Sandra cook dinner for Simon. Whether Simon was okay with this, I didn't know, but something felt wrong. When I tried to speak up, Sandra played the dutiful woman in front of Simon by apologizing tearfully and made me the villain.
Away from Simon, she'd snap. This is why I hate old ladies. Maybe I should tell Simon you're bullying me.
Unable to resolve anything, I eventually gave up trying. Every day was the same. I'd wake Simon, he'd leave, and Sandra would rise at her leisure. Sandra, now taking my housework for granted, began complaining.
You, rice for breakfast? I thought we agreed on bread. Typical useless old lady, whatever.
Despite complaining, she started eating.
Oh, by the way, Simon's on a business trip today and I'm going out tonight. Don't bother with dinner.
I wanted to tell her I'm neither her mother nor her maid, but I just swallowed my words and replied, okay. When I told Simon about Sandra's true nature, he didn't believe. He thinks I was making it up and scolded me for bullying his wife. That night, with Sandra out, I enjoyed some rare time alone, feeling good. Sandra hadn't returned even by 10 p.m. when I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to find Sandra had come back, leaving her clothes scattered around the room. I discussed her unawareness as a wife, but she just glared and silently returned to her room. I was living stressful days. One holiday, returning home from my office, I overheard Simon and Sandra talking, unaware of my presence.
Simon, when will you ask her to leave? Tell your mom. Just bear with it a little longer. We'll get her to leave eventually. It's gonna be your house soon, so tell her firmly. It's such a hassle having her here. Make sure she leaves soon.
Hearing this, I was shocked. They were planning to take over the condo considering my absence. The thought of them discussing this while I was still healthy filled me with fear. Did Sandra even know how this lifestyle was funded? Simon hadn't contributed to living expenses since he started working, even after bringing Sandra home. It was all on me. My irritation grew, and I was upset that Simon was following Sandra's lead. I felt disappointed in Simon for being under Sandra's control. One day, Sandra used and broke a fountain pen I cherished from my father.
Oops, sorry. I borrowed it since it was there, but I broke it.
She casually apologized and carelessly tossed the pen aside. Seeing that, I was infuriated by considering everything that had happened so far.
You need to stop this. Do you think a simple sorry is enough after breaking someone else's property? What's going on in your head?
Sandra was clearly displeased. She saw me more furious than usual and started yelling back.
Huh, acting all high and mighty. You should be thankful I'm letting you stay here.
Letting me stay? You mean not you?
In Simon's absence, Sandra hurled abuse at me.
We were supposed to live just the two of us, and now it's so annoying to cohabit.
It's depressing, and you being here just ruins our newlywed life. Sandra unleashed her anger as if she'd been waiting for the chance. When I didn't retort, she raised her voice, saying what she'd always wanted to.
I hate your face, your voice, your personality. I live with him here, so you, the old lady, get out.
Sandra told me this. I wanted to argue back that I didn't deserve to be kicked out, but I realized arguing with her was pointless.
I quietly looked into Sandra's eyes and murmured, "Understood." Sandra smiled and was seemingly pleased.
You have packing to do, so finish it today and leave. Take all your stuff, I don't want it here.
I'm going out now, so be gone by the time I get back.
Okay, I understand.
Sandra left in high spirits. Watching her leave, I muttered to myself that I'd make her sorry. I quickly arranged for the move and packed up, relocating to my office. I wasn't in a rush. I had another place in a different floor of the same building. That night, Simon called. He sounded panicked. When I got home, not only was Sandra gone, but also TV, sofa, everything. I have no idea what's happening.
Well, you should ask Sandra for the details. Also, that house is my property. If you two plan to continue living there, you'll need to pay rent. Let's say $3,000 a month. It would usually be more, but I'll give you a family discount.
Please let Sandra know that. Simon seemed to want to say more, but I said what I needed and ended the call. Soon after, Sandra called from Simon's phone.
What the heck, you old lady? I told you to pack your stuff and leave. Not to take everything with you. That's like stealing. Where are you now? Bring everything back immediately.
Sandra was furious and showed her true colors, even with Simon nearby. In the background, I could hear Simon asking if she was the one who drove me out. The two of them started arguing on the phone while it was still connected to me.
I had to tell her to leave because you never did. Well, we can't have our life together with her around, can we?
Since Simon seemed at a loss for words, I decided to explain to Sandra.
Sandra, I don't know what Simon told you that the house is in my name. It might become Simon's eventually.
But for now, I'm still very much active. It wasn't me who moved in. It was you. All the household items are mine. You told me to pack my stuff and leave, so I did. Did I do something wrong? I could almost hear Sandra grinding her teeth in frustration over the phone.
Also, as I told Simon, if you two want to live there, you'll need to pay me rent for $3,000 a month.
Why should I pay you rent?
As I said earlier, the condo is mine. You said you guys want to live there. I moved out for you. It's only fair that you pay rent. Do you understand?
Unable to contain her irritation, Sandra screamed over the phone.
I realized no constructive conversation was possible and decided to end the call. I had silently endured Sandra moving in and had been preparing meals and taking care of her without complaint. My revenge for being kicked out was not going to end here. Whenever Simon was away on business or working late, Sandra would go out. On late nights, she always returned with different perfume scents. They weren't hers. Beginning to suspect something, I felt sorry for Simon and hired a private investigator to look into Sandra. The investigation revealed Sandra was cheating. She was obsessed with a host and had accumulated a lot of debt visiting him. She had started to seriously fall for the host. She spent all her fortune on him. It turned out she had met Simon at a mixer. She thought he was wealthy because he lived in a high-rise, planned to use him. I felt sorry for Simon, but planned to tell him before Sandra could run off with his assets. The next day, Simon was off work, so I arranged for the private investigator's report to be delivered when we could review it together. I expected a panicked call from Simon the next day, so I went to bed early as I'm thinking about what would happen. Sure enough, Simon called just after 9 a.m. Amidst Sandra's hysterical screams, Simon coldly told me he had seen the report. Hearing this, Sandra began wailing and hurling insults at both Simon and me.
Just so you know, if you cancel the marriage, I'll demand alimony. I was deceived by you after all. Don't joke with me. I was planning to take over this high-rise and live here with my beloved host. Oh shoot, Sandra, overcome with anger and carelessly spilled her own plans.
What do you mean? Who would marry someone like you? Get out of this house. I'll sue you for cheating on me with another man before a marriage. Ultimately, Sandra couldn't say anything more and quickly packed her belongings and left. Simon begged me to come back with crying and pleaded for forgiveness about the $3,000 monthly rent. Since then, I have chosen not to return home. With work deadlines looming and not wanting to move multiple times, I find it peaceful to ride alone. Plus, the view here is fantastic. When I hit a dead end, stepping out on the balcony for some fresh air always reinvigorates me. After all, my office is on the top floor of the high-rise. The view from the penthouse, which is my office, is outstanding and making the move very easy. But I've kept my whereabouts a secret from Simon. I don't want to be used again, possibly with someone worse than Sandra. Simon keeps calling, but I'm postponing any move due to the final stages of writing my book. He mentioned in a recent call that Sandra had contacted him. Apparently, she continued borrowing money for her host, and now she's desperate, unable to repay it. She even asked Simon for a loan. He's been ignoring her calls, which led her to show up at the high-rise by the distress. I advised Simon to consult a lawyer. It's a mess he created, and he needs to resolve it himself. Sandra has been a headache, but she inspired a great theme for my book, a story about a villainess like her. Once I finish this book, I plan to return home and reveal the truth to Simon. Just imagining his reaction excites me.